All right. Very good morning to all the folks on the call. A very happy Wednesday as well. So this week we are going to continue with the version 3 updates, the new features, the new capabilities, some of which was discussed in the call last week. And then Shiva is going to go and explain more about some of the newer capabilities in continuation to that. So that's going to be the agenda. As always, keep the questions coming. We'll keep an eye on chat and answer the questions as they come. So Shiva, can you please share your screen and get started? Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Srikanth. So let's basically, I'm just going to quickly share my screen here. Okay. So just to get started.
Yeah, you can see your screen now.
Yeah. So just to get started, what I'm going to do is that I'm sure that there are folks who basically kind of come in and they were not there in the last call. So I'm just very quickly going to go through a quick 5-minute overview. So first, basically the entire model of how we are essentially managing the compliance and risk, etc., is changing. We are essentially over here. You can see that when you come into an overview, you look at, you can see your asset count. You can see what is the risk that each of your assets, compliance, etc., will basically contribute. What is your risk score from a company? And basically, it is ordered in terms of risk score, top to bottom. And then basically, after that, you can essentially move into assets. And what is the core of the entire thing is essentially this concept of problems. And again, what we've done is basically, instead of just talking about saying that here is a bunch of vulnerabilities you have to fix, what we've done is we've categorized all of the problems into multiple categories. And right now we have close to 27 categories into which we've categorized everything. And so the problem groups are basically things like CISA notified vulnerabilities. And again, these are ordered based on the how quickly you need to fix them. So how severe they are. So we basically kind of put this together. So for example, information disclosure is at the bottom of the file because it's something that you can get to whenever you can get to. But essentially, these are the other things. So the top on the top of the mind, which you need to fix, is essentially what we call CISA notified vulnerabilities, which means it's being actively exploited. Second is anything which has an EPSS score above 0.95, then you have to look at it. And a classical example of these kinds of vulnerabilities would be the WebP vulnerability that we are tracking right now, or basically the Fortinet vulnerability that basically kind of tracked all of us a couple of weeks back. Those would essentially fall into this category. And when you basically see here, you essentially have the number of problems that fall under this category. So here you can see basically all of I can basically switch this to 100, and then you'll essentially see all the vulnerabilities that form part of this. And then you have a view which shows you how many assets basically fall under this problem category and how many basically companies are essentially affected. So this is basically the global view. I can right from here essentially switch over to a single company view. And basically the numbers will just update. So I'm there right in that screen, and I can essentially see what is this thing. So you can see the problem count goes down, the number of asset count go down, but the problem details remain the same, but the asset details will remain. And then clicking here essentially takes you to the list of assets which have a problem. So that's essentially kind of the core of the system, allowing you to essentially kind of navigate through the system with one view, where you can basically shift from a global view to company view and look at the underlying data immediately without having to basically shift between different screens. So here you can see what is the count of problems, how many companies basically have this particular problems in this problem group, and the number of assets that are impacted right over here. And each of these numbers are clickable. So when you click on it, you essentially get the appropriate information corresponding to that. Now, when I click on an asset, then essentially it takes me to the asset detail view, where I can essentially see all of the details of this. Plus, we talked about asset timeline, where it essentially talks about every change that's happening on an asset essentially is being tracked and basically brought back into the system. So this is something that we talked about last week. And then the next one is essentially what we call as a remediation plan. One of the biggest things that we've done with the remediation plan again is that you have all the updates, you have the EPSS score, again, all of these basically kind of there. And then we basically have, for example, a run script which basically tells you what a script you need to run, and then you can essentially download the remediation script, and the remediation script will essentially kind of download, and basically you can essentially use that remediation script to remediate the problems that you have within the system. I'm just going to refresh this very quickly because now again you basically have the views which basically are into application vulnerabilities. You can basically very quickly get to pending OS patches, look at how many assets have basically patches which are pending across your companies and across your systems. So all of that essentially is at your fingertips. Now, we did talk briefly about vulnerabilities, and again, in vulnerabilities, basically it is nothing but a view which essentially shows you that what are the problem groups and this thing. So we're maintaining that common theme. So what I'm going to focus on today is basically the entire thing about compliance and compliance standards. How are we changing compliance and compliance standards, right? So now, basically, the first thing that we talked about a while back basically was this compliance check master. So what is the compliance check master? This is essentially a set of checks that essentially contribute to any of the compliances that you're doing. So if you really look at it, we basically have created something which is called a check ID, and then it says what exactly does this check ID mean, what is it applicable to, whether it's desktop or server, and then basically we have a mapping compliance ID that we essentially put in place. Now, when you basically take all of these checks, what happens is these are the checks that are actually executed by the agent on the actual machine, and then it brings back the data saying that whether this is compliant, non-compliant. And again, we have basically the whole thing which is mapped to whether it is Windows or Linux, and basically when it was updated, all of this basically is there. Plus the ability for you to add your own compliance checks is essentially basically something that we are bringing together. Now, why are we building this compliance check master? I will kind of explain that. Now here, basically we have the whole thing about compliance standards, right? So now we have CIS. Now again, with CIS, what we've done is that earlier we used to just dump a whole bunch of items and basically say, yeah, this is the CIS and this is the number of assets which are compliant or non-compliant. Right now, we're changing the way that we are reporting it. Now, if you really look at it, these are basically the different key sections that are basically there in the CIS compliance. Basically, what are the administrative templates? What are the security options? What are the local policies? What are the system services, right? So each one of these basically has a bunch of items that essentially are there, which basically are under this title. You have basically certain compliances that need to be met. Now, what you see here is basically that you see what is compliant. So you can see the number of items that you're compliant with. How many items are you not compliant with? Okay. Then you see two values over here. It says manual compliant and manual non-compliant. What does this mean? So unlike in the earlier case where we would just essentially look at whatever we could automate and we just threw those sections on the screen, in this current version, we are not doing that. What we are essentially doing is we are bringing back all of the non-compliant items and basically kind of showing it to you. So, but we'll get to that. But and then the same theme continues where we essentially talk about these are the companies where basically this non-compliance is there, okay? And the number of assets where this compliance is, the non-compliance is there, basically all visible to you from a single pane of glass. So you can essentially kind of click through and then basically get to every asset, every company right from here. So when I go to a company, I can basically see how many assets in that company basically are non-compliant. So all of this basically from this single view from each of the categories. So the thing that you can do is that you can assign each category to a technician and then allow that technician to essentially work off this particular scheme of things. Now, I can basically, for example, switch. So I'm going into PCI DSS, right? So when you see PCI DSS, here is basically the PCI DSS. These are the list of items that are there under PCI DSS. Now, what I can essentially do is that I click on, well, we were talking about manual non-compliant, right? Now, if you look at all of this, right? So these are all things which essentially are things which essentially you have to do manually. You cannot essentially kind of do this. So all security policies and operational procedures that are end-to-end deployment are documented and kept up to date, in use, known to all affected parties. This is something that as a system, we cannot essentially kind of determine whether it is compliant in your system or non-compliant in your system. Now, what you can essentially do is you can essentially check off this And then here you can essentially see one button which says upload evidence for this. Now you can then basically mark this as compliant or non-compliant, upload a file and add comments to this. Okay. So this way what happens is that the entire standard for PCI DSS or for HIPAA or for any of the standards that we're doing, we are essentially covering in this itself, where you can upload the evidence. You can essentially kind of do this for a company or across companies and essentially kind of maintain compliance. So the moment you basically enter that data, it'll essentially go through a workflow where it goes for approval, and once it's approved, essentially it would essentially come into the manual compliant phase. So this essentially is the second piece that we are doing. Now, what is manual compliant essentially means that you've put in the evidence, you have basically marked it as compliant, and it basically has been approved, then it comes into manual compliant. Manual non-compliant is when it is in this state where basically we do not know, you have not uploaded any evidence, then it will essentially continue to remain in manual non-compliant. And this is something that you'll have to work on in order to basically make it compliant. So this way, what we are doing is that we're bringing all of your policies and the policy requirements as well as whatever we can automate into a single dashboard where you can manage it from one place and then report about it from one single location. Okay. And then, so this is essentially what we are doing with compliance. Now, the reason for why we built this whole compliance check master, and basically kind of, I'll just take a small detour on this. The reason we built this compliance check master is a lot of you basically are fairly advanced, right? You basically say that, okay, I understand CIS, I understand PCI, etc., but I want to pick up a standard from CIS. I want to pick up 10 tenets of CIS, and then I want to pick something from PCI, and I want to put it together and create my own standard. Now, the problem is, how do you create such a standard, right? So this compliance check master will allow you to create this standard, and we will actually go through a complete tutorial on how to do that in the upcoming calls. But you will be able to define your own standard. So, for example, if you are WhatsApp, WhatsApp can define what is my entry compliance standard. So when I'm onboarding a customer, I want to basically measure his compliance to my this thing. So that entry compliance standard is something that we basically will be able to build using this. So this is essentially kind of what we are using this checks for. And we will basically kind of walk you through this process of creating your own standard in one of the calls ahead. But I just wanted to lay it out that this is possible. The other thing that I wanted to kind of just walk through is, now basically I have a set of problems, right? Now I know that, for example, this particular vulnerability, I really cannot fix because basically I need to basically, I have to run a .NET application, and this .NET application basically cannot be upgraded at this point of time. So what am I going to do? I'm going to basically say either it's justified for a business reason, it's a false positive, it's a compensating control on the place. And then I'm going to basically say the reason for this is that upgrade not possible right now. Okay. And then what I can do is that I can either send it to a user who's basically an internal user, which means that they are on board on the system, or you may be sending it to your customer. So I'm just going to basically enter an email. So this is my old email. So basically I'm sending it to that. And then I'm saying that I'm starting from 4th of October. So I'm going to give it time till 30th of November, right? So this is the start date and end date. And I essentially save this particular record. Now, the moment I do this, it essentially kind of initiates a workflow. And this workflow basically results in, so I'm just going to stop my sharing because I was sharing the application. I'll share the desktop. Okay, so when I go into my email right over here, I can essentially see that I have basically an email. Now this email talks about whatever we said, right? This is basically the problem ID, the problem name, and what is the reason. And this is a customizable template that we can essentially put together. And then I basically have a button where I say whether this is to be approved or rejected. So I can click on this. So So this is essentially as a customer I'm coming in, right? So basically he's not being asked to authenticate, etc., because this is essentially a mail that is being sent to him. And over here, he has basically the ability to create, to approve or reject it. So I basically click on approve and I say approved as the. Now I basically click on approve here. Once I click here, basically this is approved. And once this is approved, then when I basically get back to, so basically I'll just close this out. And then when I get back to my application, now this is basically suppressed. And now when I go into this particular view, right? So I can refresh this table. You can essentially see that this was basically approved. And you can see that this basically was the approval note. And this is a record that you have. So essentially you can see that the complete details of what is the vulnerability that you suppressed, and the approval record for that is in there. Now, in case it's a false positive, this could be something that you approve within the MSP. If this is something that is because of the customer upgrade, you will send it to a customer. So that's basically a choice of the workflow that you essentially have with this entire system. So with this, basically what we are doing is that we are basically allowing you to completely look at your complete assets. You're able to look at compliance and basically use a consistent workflow across all of your compliance standards, handle all your manual compliances, all your automated compliances, all this in a single dashboard. Now, the next thing that we are essentially going to do today is that after this, I'm just going to kind of invite my colleague Sandeep, who's been kind of building dashboards. So what we're going to talk about is that what is going to be the experience, because quite a few of you are going to basically kind of experience this starting next week. And then what will be your experience in terms of building dashboards? So we want to just give you a little bit of a preview, because in case any of you are basically trying to build dashboards, it will be useful for all of you. So with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen and basically ask Sandeep to share a screen. And we will essentially kind of go through how the data that we saw right now, how you can dashboard it and you can create different views of this particular data. Because what we are doing is that we are creating a very data-rich platform. So Sandeep, can you please share your screen? So what I asked Sandeep to do today is, instead of just basically showing some standard dashboards, etc., what he's going to do is he's going to create a brand new dashboard. So, right. So what he's going to do is he's going to start from scratch, create a dashboard, right? And then let's call this basically a dashboard that we're doing on the weekly call. Yeah, assets dashboard for the weekly call. So now we're basically going to create a dashboard. So let's basically start with, on the top, you want the company logo, right? So I want to put an image on top of it. So Sandeep, like, how do I basically put an image on top, right? Because we always start with a company logo that we basically want to put, so that so yeah, so we drag an image over there, okay? Okay. Okay. Okay, we want to make sure that the turtle is seen clearly. Okay, perfect. So now we got that out of the way. Now I need a title for this report, right? So can I get some text in there? Okay. Yeah, so can I get some text in there? Okay, so Sandeep, can we essentially now basically kind of, I want to essentially kind of, yeah, so just say that this is an asset report. Okay, so can we basically kind of quickly go over and kind of um, create uh, like a simple gauge, which basically shows some data about what is the uh, what are the assets that are in there. Like I just want to see a breakdown of all the assets. So maybe assets by types or asset by this thing. So can you just create a gauge? Yep. Yep, that's nice. Assets by risk score. Okay, so this is basically the data sources that have already been created for you in your entity. So essentially you will get all of these data sources. So now what we've done is we've basically assigned it a data source. Now you can essentially see all of the columns that are there in that particular data source. So now he's basically just going to pull the risk score in. Yep. And then he's going to basically take the average. Yep. So Sandeep, what if I basically want to take the maximum for risk score, because average risk score is not good enough. Like I want to take the max risk score because my max, yeah, so perfect. So that's essentially the uh, a gauge that you created. Now, can we very quickly basically create a bar chart, which basically shows us like um, kind of the number of vulnerabilities by assets. So folks, the reason that I'm doing this entire demo with Sandeep is to essentially kind of show everyone that, look, if you spend 10-15 minutes, you can essentially create your own dashboard, put your own data. You can basically mash it up with any other data that you want to bring from any other system. And you can essentially put this all together and basically get this. Now, are there going to, like, am I supposed to do all of this hard work? The answer is no, because there are pre-existing widgets that we will be supplying along with this entire thing, which will contain all of this data. Now, if there is something that is over and above the widgets that we are supplying, that is essentially where you will essentially have the option of either A, the way that we work today, where you can essentially send us a ticket and we'll create a new widget and publish out everyone. Or you could just basically very simply create one yourself and then you can publish it to everybody else. So that's also possible. Now, when we basically kind of, so this is basically nice. This is basically a bar chart. Now, Sandeep, this is basically across all the companies, right? How about if I want to basically kind of, I want to basically have a filter on the companies. How do I basically filter this out? Oh, so I can introduce a drop down. Oh, so since we have the asset, so we can essentially, okay. So you're basically going to filter on host name. So you're going to give me a filter based on host name. Okay. So now if I filter on the host name, will the data change? So you can see that when I choose a particular asset, depending on whether data is available or not, you will essentially get it basically filters it based on that particular asset, right? So that's basically the advantage of this. Now, Sandeep, can we essentially kind of create some even more advanced charts, right? So how about basically we create like a radix chart, like basically I want to basically see a radar chart, right? So if I were to able to create a radar polar chart, so can you show me how do we create that? But I don't know if a lot of you are following, but basically I think Patrick Garrity from Nuclear Security of late has been posting a lot of interesting visualizations for vulnerabilities and how those could be used to kind of understand how vulnerabilities work, etc. So what we are trying to do is to basically kind of, instead of giving those pre-built versions, we are essentially kind of giving you the ability to create these kinds of visualizations yourself and have a look at all of this data. So while that is being done more at a global level, these are essentially things which are being done for your companies, for your this thing, so that you can essentially kind of have kind of more interesting discussions, especially with your customers who are basically saying, okay, well, what exactly am I paying you for, right? So you can have these discussions with them, especially with the kind of visualizations that you have. That's the overall idea. So radar polar charts basically help you to understand what is the spread and distribution of a certain parameter over your entire asset range. So you could essentially say, I want to look at how many of my system, what is the, across all my companies, where is my risk in terms of SMB vulnerabilities, or what is my risk in terms of SSL vulnerabilities. So these are all things that you can essentially kind of put together and then have a look at it using these radar polar charts. So that's awesome, Sandeep. How about basically I just look at a tree map, right? So I want to look at basically a breakdown of my asset types as a tree map. So how do I do that? Nice. So you're basically breaking it down, saying that you want to see which operating system has the maximum number of OS vulnerabilities that are there by operating system. Oh, nice. You can essentially set up ranges, nice gradients. Nice. So folks, with all of these stuff that we do with gradients and all of these pieces, I think one of the past comments that was there was basically our graphics and everything were looking very 1990s. Hopefully this should solve that problem of basically looking more 2023 kind of thing. Okay, so Sandeep, let's also basically kind of very quickly show them how they can essentially kind of use any of the widgets that we are pre-creating, right? So if I want to just bring in a widget that is already being created and bring it into the dashboard, how could I do that? So these are widgets which are pre-built, so you can essentially kind of bring it in and drop it there, right? And what we're showing you here is the fact that this is basically a non-linked data source. Now, this is a data source that we basically got from an open source dashboard, and we basically put that data in. So what this shows you is that as long as you can essentially pull this data from any other source, you can essentially kind of put that in the same dashboard. So this way, what happens is that you have one unified place where you can put all of this data and then present your customers with a clean dashboard of all the information that he needs. And then, as we explained last week, you can essentially share and basically send these dashboards to specific customers, and they can basically either have a public view of it, or you can basically make it login based on the publication. So this is basically kind of how we would essentially cover dashboards. So Sandeep, my only request is, can we also go and show everyone how easy it would be to create reports too? Because we kind of are based on the same framework, but I would like to basically also walk through creation of a report. So say, for example, I want to essentially pull a couple of things which are already existing, but I basically want to also basically create a new report that basically I want to add some of my own widgets. So how would I go about doing it? So I think we can very quickly see, like, text image, I think everyone is now fully aware of. So just drag and drop something and basically kind of move forward. I would like to basically see, for example, one stat bar chart and a column chart, which is something that we didn't show in the last piece. The key thing is that this essentially is kind of using the same framework, same pieces. So essentially it's easier for us to do this. So, yep. Yep, a stack bar chart. So you have all of the fields just like you had earlier. Basically put your what's in your column, then what's in the X and Y, and a quick radial gauge. I think we understand how this is to be configured, Sandeep. Could we essentially just kind of get into how to use any pre-existing widgets into the report, please, so that we can add those? So this basically is the entire reporting. We've basically seen the different types of charts and different types of views that you can essentially create in reports. So, and of course, we have basically a whole bunch of items which are there. You can essentially create bubble charts. You can basically create lines, all of that stuff. So, Sandeep, thanks for that. We'll basically I think now we can save this report and you can publish it. And of course, you can essentially do the same thing, which is send it to people. And we also have the scheduler, which essentially allows you to schedule these reports. So all of that basically in a single platform. And again, as I said, these reports can essentially encompass data, not only from the Connect Secure system, which we have essentially put together, but it can also basically encompass data from other third-party systems. And so you can combine data from other systems and basically provide a single comprehensive report. So that essentially is what we wanted to kind of look at today. So with that said, I think we've covered whatever we had in the agenda for today. So Srikanth, you can help me, and if you can go through these questions, then we can answer any of the questions.
Yeah, certainly. So Sandeep, thank you very much. Appreciate your help as always. So maybe you can request you to stop screen sharing, and then we can get back to the questions. Thank you. Yeah, so I think the first question is from Dennis. Should there be a category for malicious browser extensions detected? And also, what triggers an entry for quote unquote running services?
So if there are any services that basically, so what we are essentially looking at is that when we take a system baseline, then basically these are the services that are essentially supposed to be running on that system. And then after that, if any new services come up, we essentially kind of put that into running services. And you could essentially kind of say that, yeah, this is an accepted running service. And in which case it will essentially kind of say, okay. And as long as there are no vulnerabilities, it will allow you to essentially kind of in future, it will not alert you on that. So that's the entire idea.
Okay, hopefully that answers your question, Dennis. And Steve's question is, when does the new UI take effect? So when we'll be rolling this out? I think the answer to that, Steve, is it's probably going to be a few weeks down the line, because as engineering is releasing it, we also have backend work in terms of getting documentation and and so on. So Shiva, is that correct? It'll be like a couple of weeks at least.
So the first set of people who had registered, they are all getting migrated as we discussed on the 8th, and essentially they will have access to their systems on the 10th. And then basically with them, we are doing a 2-week run to essentially kind of make sure that everything is okay, and basically they are happy with what they see, and basically the data is consistent. And post that, we will start the rollout for everyone.
Okay. What is the, Dennis, again, next question, what is the retention period for the agent timeline?
The agent timeline, basically, right now the retention is basically for 6 months. After 6 months, basically the agent timeline is basically kind of archived. However, you can essentially download the agent timeline as a Excel export for 2 years.
Okay. Next question is it possible to sort by IG? In fact, a follow-on question, filtering by IG, L1 versus L2.
Yes, you will be able to sort by IG1, IG2, IG3. Basically, it is something that basically the team is working on. It's a filter on top. So basically, against CIS, you basically see IG1, IG2, IG3. With all of the, like PCI DSS, there is no thing. But for example, with the other standards, like for example, working on CMMC, there you have basically a moderate and you have complete. And so whatever variations are there, based on the variations, you have one other combo box.
Great. So hopefully Devon and Dennis, that answers that. Chris Blunt, on the compliance asset view, it would be useful to see the company that they're associated with.
So you do see the view, right? So you see, basically you can click on the companies, you see the list of companies and number of assets in there. And you also, when you click on the assets, you see the companies and the asset that the company in which to which the asset belongs to. So that's already there. Because you see the number of companies. The only reason is that you can't put the list of companies directly in the main categories, because then it becomes very difficult. But of course, you can switch the company, then it will essentially will show you a company specific view.
Okay, Brandon has a question. Can you do manual compliance with things like technical controls? For instance, Windows patching is handled through our RMM and not a group policy. So we would want to add notes and evidence like what you showed, Shiva.
So yes, you can basically override even automated checks as basically saying that I want to override this. And it basically follows the same suppression workflow that we basically displayed for the vulnerability. The same thing holds good for this, where you basically will mark it compliant and then you send it for approval.
Okay, moving on. Todd, can you see who made the suppression approval?
Yes, you will see who basically who created the request and who approved the request.
Great. Tim has a question. Tim Golden would love to see API for the policy documentation, automating the continuous evidence collection of documents.
Yeah, everything, as I said, everything that we do basically is API driven. So everything that we have is basically going to be provided by the API. The only thing is that we are going to apply rate limiting, because I'm going to be honest, like last week, we had a person who used the API to download basically 100,000 reports, right? And essentially that caused a huge load on the system, and we experienced some instability due to that. So we are going to basically implement rate limiting and basically kind of make it a fair rate limit, right? So we're going to basically allow 60 requests per minute. And I think that's fair enough for people to essentially get all the data that they require.
Great. Patrick has a question. Will the community be able to share report templates?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Adam has a question. How do you access and create a dashboard setting? Not
so in your instance, essentially you have your own instance of dashboard. So you can essentially create basically when you on the UI basically. Oh, let me just quickly share my screen and basically kind of show you where it is, because I think this is the question. So basically when I go to overview, as I explained last time, we have this right-hand toolbar. So here you can see this is basically dashboard and this is report. So when you click on this, you will get redirected to that. So this is reports and this is dashboard.
Great. Matt has a question. Would we have to create this custom dashboard for each company we want to share with? Or is there a way to have the dashboard data change based on the viewer or some other variable?
No, it's a variable. So basically you make company as a variable, then you can switch the company. You will basically see company. By default, we give company as the variable.
Hey, Jay. Let me mute the meeting I'm in. Okay.
Okay, Kevin. Kevin has the same question as Matt, so I think that's answered. Again, Dennis, is there documentation for system? For example, an explanation of how to use a master widget?
Yeah, so we are in the process of writing this, Dennis, and we are going to basically be creating how-to videos also. But yes, the documentation is in progress.
Yeah, Todd has the same question. That's how to things would be more useful than when we have the product ourselves to try so that we can do it.
See, these are initial calls where we're trying to essentially at least kind of put it out there so that we can get initial feedback saying, do people like it, they don't like it, or basically it's too difficult. But essentially with the feedbacks that you are giving us, we can essentially kind of look at whether we're meeting all the requirements. But yes, we will be going through sessions where we will essentially kind of do these things where we'll build dashboards along with you and we'll do all of these pieces so that you can follow along.
Okay. Benny has a question. Can the custom dashboards be duplicated?
Yes.
Great. Again, next question from Dennis. Looks like there'll be a library of dashboards and reports created by the Connect Secure team. An additional library of dashboards and reports created by the partners would be a great way to share our expertise and dashboard report building skills. Yeah, I think spot on. That's what Shiva said. I think that's a great way for the community to kind of participate in this whole piece. All right, Dennis has a further follow-on question suggestion that we create a sharing system somewhere on the platform so that partners can choose to share the dashboards they create with other partners.
We already have that. That's what I said. So we can essentially, you can essentially click share and then it will automatically share it with other partners. So we can essentially deploy it to all of the other partners.
Awesome. Dennis, thank you. Yeah, this he says is better than Crystal reports. Yeah, we agree. It's that it's certainly a step forward in many ways. Brandon, in the old console, there is a compliance remediation group policy objects. Has this expanded to all compliance in the new V3? It'd be nice to maybe have GPOs based on what framework you're trying to be compliant to. I'm not sure what framework the old one was following.
So, Brandon, the answer to this is that if you really look at it, the GPOs basically have nothing to do with compliance, right? So the GPOs, there are certain, whatever we put as check IDs, those check IDs are basically what eventually becomes part of the compliance. So right now, what we've done is that we have essentially taken the check IDs and mapped it to each of the standards. So all the policies that essentially apply to a standard, we are essentially publishing that as a GPO policy and a local policy. Both of those will essentially be available. Third is we are also basically building a script that essentially you can run on a machine in order to basically create this compliance.
All right. I think, Enrique, is there an option to scan machines for certain confidential documents using regular expressions, regular words?
Yeah, so the new PII scanner, basically, we have exposed all the regular expressions that we want to look at. And basically, you can essentially kind of add whatever regular expressions you want.
Okay, great. And then the last question right now is from Jerry. For the self-hosting folks, any thoughts on when the new version for the compliance audit tool will be available?
It will be November first week, and basically you can either this was a question which was last week. So either you could essentially do it yourself, where you basically will run the script, or we are basically going to be offering this service for all of the people where we will run the scripts for you and basically get it migrated cleanly. So my request is, if you can allow us the access so that we can migrate you cleanly. If not, we will give you the script and basically kind of you will have to migrate it on your own.
Okay, so we are all caught up on questions. Yeah, so any further questions, any concerns, any doubts? Yeah, thanks, Mark. So yeah, doesn't seem to be any further questions. We are all caught up. Shiva, just want to kind of chime in with any concluding thoughts, and then we can wrap up this call and then continue from next Wednesday. Oh, I'm sorry. One final question. For the scan of documents, any time limit?
Any time limits in the sense? I'm not sure.
Yeah, can I request you to quickly come online and
no, it scans the, like, if you can specify specific folders, or you can basically specify the entire machine. And the entire machine, we essentially have a bunch of extensions that we will scan for, because there's no point of scanning a DLL or a EXE. So basically there are a bunch of extensions that we scan for and basically look for this information.
So Adam has a question that rather than waiting for the rollout, could I get the new UI? So I think that the new UI, you can, we can take your name down, and I'll request Vrushali to reach out to you, and then include you as part of the early adopter list. Adam, if that makes sense. Okay, so a couple of other people also want to get added to the list. So Vrushali, please, can you take that list down, and then we will get that up. Yeah, so seemingly all caught up. Shiva, you want to put any quick thoughts, and then we can wrap up?
No, just wanted to thank, I think Adam has one final question. Yeah, you can basically, okay, I think you were not there last week. Basically, we talked about tags. So you can essentially kind of um, create a tag, create dynamic tags, static tags, and you can essentially kind of filter everything based on those tags. So that tag basically becomes a group for you.
And if Chris has a question, would it be possible to make group of assets within a company?
Yeah, that's what I explained just now.
Okay, and when can you get a copy of this meeting in the last week's meeting, when it can be uploaded on the link?
The last week's meeting is already uploaded. This week's meeting within the next 48 hours will be uploaded.
Okay, so we are caught up.
So Adam, Sentinel-1, basically we've gotten 3 or 4 cases like this. When we went and looked at it, basically those were false positives. So please send us what are the things that Sentinel-1 is seeing on a machine that we are also looking at. If there is a problem on our side, we are absolutely happy to basically fix it up. If not, basically we'll tell you why it is basically a false positive. Okay, thank you everyone for basically giving us an hour of your time. I thank you for your patience in this, and hopefully next week it will have a lot of, we'll have some feedback from the people for whom it has been rolled out, and we can basically kind of go through this. Thank you very much.